Hi, good morning. And I want to thank you for joining us at ParentMap's Every Child Summit and webinar. And this talk that we're having now with Debbie Reber, SOS for Parents in the Trenches. We're very excited to be launching our Every Child event live, sort of not live. It's been exciting so far. So thank you, Debbie, for joining us. Debbie Reber is a parenting activist, New York Times bestselling author, keynote speaker, and founder of Tilt Parenting, a website, top podcast and resource for parents who are raising differently wired children. I'm Elaine Sulkin, and I'm the CEO of ParentMap. I am the proud mama of 3 adult children and Bubby to 2 little ones, a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old, which is a source of a tremendous amount of fun for me these days. For those of you who may not be completely familiar with ParentMap, we are a rich content site devoted to your parenting journey. We like to describe it as somewhere between broccoli and popcorn, broccoli being health, development, and wellness, a lot of what we're doing all day today in our Every Child Summit. And then nutritional popcorn, which is all the fun, free, and fabulous things you can do with your kids. We also publish several parenting books, host an award-winning website that we hope you'll check out, and now produce dozens of live virtual events. So before we actually begin, I want to remind everyone that this will be recorded and republished for educational and marketing purposes. So, and we'll add it to the live stream for the Every Child event. Also, please use the feature at the bottom of your screen to add any questions. And once Debbie is done with her talk, then we will field questions. So keep those coming throughout the event. And with that, I turn it over to you, Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be able to still do this, although I love Seattle, so I'm sad that I can't be there in person this year. But I have a lot to share with you guys today, so we're going to just dive right in. What I'm going to do today is walk you through 10 tilts. These are designed to help you find more peace and confidence in your life of raising a differently wired child. And I just want to give you a heads up. I'm going to be sharing a lot of strategies with you today, but I'm inviting you not to listen to this thinking that you have to do all of these things. I would encourage you to just listen to this with an open heart, an open mind, and just really tune in to see things that might resonate with you. So notice when you get a hit in your gut that what I'm sharing might just be exactly what you need for a specific situation you're dealing with right now with your differently wired child. And then you can just take that and try it in your world. And one last thing, these are not big strategies or action items. These are kind of little tweaks, they're reframes. That's because the only thing that we have control over really in our lives, especially now, is ourselves and how we want to show up as parents to our kids. And so that's what these tilts are designed to do, to help you better show up for your child, for your family, and for yourself. So let's dive in. So the first tilt I'm sharing with you is to question everything that you thought you knew about parenting. And this is really where we have to start because, we all go into parenting thinking that we know what it's going to look like, or we have really strong ideas about everything from the parenting philosophies we want to use to the educational approaches that we want to use, the characteristics or the traits that we really value in people and that we assume our kids are going to embody. And so we need to start questioning. And I want to share one of my favorite quotes with you. This is from Neil Donald Walsh, who wrote many books, including the book Conversations with God. And he says, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And I love this quote. I have it all over my house. I have it on little placard in my bedroom. I have it on postcards. But I love this because when we can kind of question all those things that we thought we knew about parenting, it opens us up to so many possibilities, and that can be uncomfortable. So there is nothing actually really comfortable about raising a differently wired kid, but When we can open up to that and start questioning, it actually starts feeling a lot better, a lot freer. So, what we want to question is where our parenting expectations aren't meshing with our current reality. And we also want to think about how might the beliefs that we have that we're holding on to might be keeping us stuck. So, I'm going to give you some examples of that. These are some things that I used to believe about my son. I have a 16-year-old differently wired son. So, and I homeschooled him for many years, which really stressed me out. Even though I knew it was working, I had a lot of fears about that. Um, I had this idea that he couldn't be homeschooled for his whole education or he would never make it in college. I was convinced he needed a bigger circle of friends. I felt really strongly that he must be able to handle unmet expectations better than he does because life is full of things that don't go our way. I really believe that he needs to care about school more. And I also, as a athlete, I was have been an athlete my whole life, as was my husband. We really felt deeply that he has to be in an organized sport. So these were pretty firm beliefs that I had in my parenting life. And so, as you can imagine, when I show up as a parent to my child with these beliefs in place, I'm not actually parenting the child that I have. I'm parenting the child I was expecting to have. And so you can see where that is not going to work really well. So, what I want you guys to think about is that there is, I think this is New York City subway system, I'm not sure. There is no one way that this parenting journey has to look for anyone. And that's true for the parent of any child, but especially those of us raising differently wired kids. So there's really no limitations to the paths that we can go down and experiment with. So I really encourage you to start questioning. And I will also just say that this can be hard. I mentioned, being outside your comfort zone, but it does get easier with practice. So I encourage you to start questioning when you start doing that and you start thinking to yourself with your beliefs, wait a minute, is that actually true? The shift has already begun. So these are little tweaks, but that shift can actually start to just loosen things up, which can feel so much better. All right, my next tilt I want to share is to stop fighting who your child is and to lean in. And I'm going to share another quote with you. This is by someone named Byron Katie. I love this quote. She says, when you argue with reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time. So to me, this is completely true. And what I have learned in doing the work I do with Tilt Parenting is that probably the biggest pain point for parents is that chasm between their expectations and their reality. They're arguing with reality kind of every day, and they're not ready to give up their vision for what they thought their family or their life with their child would look like. And so when I talk about leaning in, it really does look different for everyone, but at its core, it is about surrender. The good news about this is that when we surrender to who our child is, everything starts to get easier. So our child starts to just kind of be who they are without getting the energy or the message from us that they are doing it wrong or there's something wrong with the way that they are. That is going to pay off big time. They'll start to grow more confident. It kind of unlocks them and gets them out of defense mode so that they are more receptive to all the development that they have to do, social emotional development, really understanding who they are in the world and how they can show up with their gifts. I do want to say that leaning in and surrendering doesn't mean that we don't get to feel sad. It doesn't mean that, we shouldn't honor feelings that we have of disappointment or, it's letting go, right? It's letting go of a vision that we had. And there can be some sadness in that. So I think it's important to mourn that picture that we had. But really it's worth kind of processing through that and moving on to the other side. So I want to talk about what acceptance actually is. So first of all, it is about getting honest with yourself. We all have, you know, we all have kind of preconceived notions or ideas about neurodiversity, right? Maybe there are certain labels that we really struggle with. I really did not like ADHD for a long time. Like when that was first suggested when my guy was 5, that was something going on, I had a very negative reaction to the label of ADHD. I had to kind of confront that and ask myself, what is that all about? And just recognize I was buying into a lot of the stereotypes and the negative stigma associated with ADHD. So we want to kind of uncover the stuff that we're not really talking about and be real about, get it all out on the table. The beliefs that we have, if there are aspects or traits of who our kids are that we're kind of secretly hoping will go away, we want to think about those things. We also want to make a conscious choice to embrace who our child is, right? So we want to be intentional about this and just start noticing when we are responding with frustration or annoyance or in some way that is sending them the message that they're not okay, because we know that the way that they show up is because of the way that they are wired. So we want to really kind of start to notice that. And then of course we want to reframe. I'm giving its own slide. So here's an example of what this looks like. Maybe you have a child who likes to interrupt all the time. That could be kind of frustrating, right? And the thought that you might have is, oh, it drives me crazy when he interrupts all the time. He does it all the time, right? And when we're thinking that, we might respond from that place, like, oh, stop interrupting me. Will you stop interrupting me? I'm talking, right? If we reframe this and we think, my child has so many ideas. It's really hard for him to keep it all inside, right? He's so excited. Same thing is happening. Our child's still interrupting us, but we're recognizing and actually honoring that this is part of how their brain is wired. When they have an idea, they really need to share it in that moment. And so this is a lagging skill, right? This is an area for growth. But the way that we respond to it is going to change the way our child feels about themselves, and it's going to change the energy surrounding this situation. And by the way, we can do reframing with everything. This example can apply to so many different circumstances and scenarios that we go through with our kids. All right, I'm going to move on to till 3. Parent from a place of possibility instead of fear. And this is an important one. I think it's really important right now in this time that we talk about fear. It feels like it's a big part of our lives. What's happening in the world and with politics and with coronavirus, it's a very intense time. And it impacts us. It influences the way that we show up as parents and the way that we are able to be with our kids. So we want to start tuning into that. I'm going to share another quote from Neil Donald Walsh. This is all human actions are motivated at their deepest level by 2 emotions, fear or love. So I remember when I first read this quote and it really jumped out at me, and I tested it. I read it like 20 years ago and I really found it to be true. And it really can be distilled down to those 2 kind of core emotions, core drivers. When we are operating from a place of fear, that kind of narrows our world. It limits our thinking. It creates more fearful energy. Our kids are going to feel that. We're going to feel it. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in some ways. And so what we want to do is stop doing this. We want to stop making decisions from a place of fear. The hard part is that making a decision out of fear actually feels really safe. So it feels like the safer option because we know it. We're not going to open ourselves up for disappointment. So it can feel really scary then to pivot and to start making decisions out of love. So let's talk about this a little deeper, and I'll show you how to do that. These are some of the common fears that I hear from people. These may resonate with you, some of them. Am I screwing up my child? Will he ever be able to tie shoelaces, ride a bike, all kinds of things? Am I doing enough? Am I doing enough to help him or her? How will I afford to pay for the tutor or the therapist or the services? What happens if I lose my job and I can't afford private school? What happens if I lose my job, period, which is a reality for so many families right now? What if my partner and I don't make it? We start worrying about the future. If they're going to graduate, will they go to college? Will they ever be able to hold down a job? We worry about adulthood. Will they fit in? And then also just, will things always feel this hard? So these are just a few greatest hits, but there's a lot of fear in our lives when it comes to our kids. But when we start really looking at fear, we find that it is often holding us back from making decisions that would actually really support or benefit our child. And I know that a lot of you are afraid of making the wrong choice because the stakes feel so high and we don't want to screw something up. Even if we know something isn't working, our current situation, it feels safer sometimes to stay there instead of doing what we kind of in our gut know what is the right thing for our family. So, what we want to do is practice choosing love and possibility. So, how do we do that? The first thing I encourage parents to do is to get it all out on the table, just like all the beliefs that we had. We want to do the same with our fears. So, really get clear on what are the fears, the biggest fears that you have in relation to your child. These can be like the nightmare inducing fears, the super irrational ones. Just go there, write them down. And it might seem like avoiding those is the right move, but actually, that idea, what we resist persists, right? We need to bring things out into the open so that we can deal with them. Because what we really want to do is know those fears really well. So when they pop up, we see them for what they are. I talk about making an uneasy alliance with our fears, and that's really our goal with our fears. And then we can apply the gift of maybe. So we can choose, some of those fears that we've come up with when we got it all on the table and rewrite them through a lens of maybe. I'm going to give you an example, but I'm just going to mention this concept of the gift of maybe comes from a woman named Allison Carmen. She wrote a book called The Gift of Maybe, and I had her on my podcast. I loved her book, and it just a very simple concept, but it can be very powerful. So here's what it looks like. So maybe the fear is my daughter's falling behind on her subjects. What if she fails all her classes, right? That's a lot of kids are falling behind right now. So I'm hearing a lot about this. So we can reframe this. We can use maybe and think about what else might be true. So maybe she's going to step up this year. We don't know. The year's not even halfway over, right? Maybe failing is actually the thing that's going to spark a shift in her intrinsic motivation. Maybe it's part of what she needs to go through. Jess Leahy wrote the book, The Gift of Failure. So sometimes failing isn't always a bad thing, right? Maybe there's actually another school that would be a better fit. Or maybe there are actually more important things than her grades right now. So you can see how just kind of taking that fear, but using the word maybe it packs less of a punch and it can feel a lot lighter. Again, you can do this with all the fears. All the fears. Maybe is such a great word. All right, I'm going to move on to the next tilt, which is let your child be on their own timeline. This is actually really closely tied into fear because there are so many messages that we get from the media, from society, from our Facebook news feeds about where our kids should be developmentally, social, emotionally, what their lives should look like, or where they're lagging or not measuring up. And especially for us, when we're raising differently wired kids, we know that they tend to develop very asynchronistically. And instead of focusing on the strengths, right, that they may have that are at this level, we often kind of get mired. My friend Margaret Webb says mired in the muck of suck, but we can get really kind of focused on their deficits and where they're not meeting the expectations that we or society might have for them at this particular age. And again, I think now more than ever, this is a big trigger for us. And so truly respecting our children's unique timeline is hard for us as parents, but it's so important. This is a really important thing to do because we know that children learn best when they feel secure, when they feel confident in their abilities, and they feel safer taking risks, and they're more resilient when they have setbacks. So let your child be on their own timeline helps them feel good about where they are right now. In order to do this, we need to kind of focus in on what I call the compare despair cycle. So we have to, again, notice where our fears are triggering us regarding our kids' timelines. Um, I spent a number of years living in the Netherlands, and I used to get really worried because kids there are so independent at a really young age, and they've got kind of the full run of the city on their bikes, hanging out with friends when they're like 10. And so I was always confronted with this idea of timeline. But again, a lot of people are worried about, I mentioned tying shoelaces before, expressing empathy and compassion. A lot of us are worried, oh my gosh, my kid's not doing that yet. Maybe those independent life skills, my child doesn't know how to make their own breakfast yet, or maybe they can't cross the street or navigate a walk to a friend's house by themselves yet. We have all these different things of where we, again, in society think they should be. But what we want to do is really ask ourselves, what am I afraid will happen if my child learns this at their unique own pace instead of what's considered typical? And we want to think about what are we most concerned about, and what's at the root of those concerns, and are they based in reality? So we can challenge all of these beliefs that we have and ask these questions. Like, again, with tying shoes, I always bring that up, but it comes up a lot. Like Velcro, people, there's Velcro shoes. You can wear them and zippers for as long as you want. I have zippered shoes. But, we want to think about, why do they really need to know this right now? And what's the worst thing that could happen if this actually is something that is acquired later in life? And how might my child mastering this in their own time actually be just fine? And I will just say, I mentioned I homeschooled my son for 6 years. And I think it was maybe in the first year. Yeah, it was actually, yeah, it was third grade was our first year homeschooling. And I remember thinking, oh, it's time to learn cursive. We got to do cursive because that's what you do in third grade. And so I bought, the Cursive Without Tears book from the Handwriting Without Tears folks. And I brought that out. It was not well received. And I just decided, you know what? He does not need to know this right now. Totally not worth the stress. I'm happy to keep typing what he is, kind of wanting to write. No need to deal, because handwriting was laborious and it wasn't great. And I will just say that years later, so I dropped it. And years later, my son, on his own accord, developed an interest in like Spencerian manuscripts and cursive writing and calligraphy, and has incredible penmanship now. And I'm 100% sure that would not have happened if I had really forced the issue. So he developed this on his own timeline, and he felt great about learning those things. And now it's something he really enjoys. All right, let's move on to tilt 5. Become fluent in your child's language. And I'm going to just share a quick example I heard from someone in my community. This mother was raising a twice exceptional son. He was in elementary school, and he was having big meltdowns on the playground. And the school was calling and saying, it's coming out of nowhere. This child is having a huge meltdown. It's really disruptive, and there's no reason why. And the school, I think, was talking with him, but they were like, no, there's no reason. And so this mother and her husband sat down and talked with their child, and they listened to what he was saying, but then they really listened, right? They kind of read between the lines. And as it turns out, this little boy was trying to keep track of all the movements and words of every child on the playground in order to predict what they were going to do next, because he had anxiety, right? And this was how he was trying to create order and deal with his anxiety. So actually, there was a reason. There was a really big reason, because trying to track the movements and words of a playground full of kids in recess is never going to happen. And so he was failing at that. And that's where the meltdown came from. So I love that example because so often our kids are giving us information, but we're not interpreting it correctly. And, this idea of language too, when I was living in the Netherlands, I really, really wanted to learn Dutch. I got maybe 80% there. But learning another language is about being curious. It's about being willing to make big mistakes and fall on your butt sometimes, make a fool out of yourself. It's about being immersed in the environment. And it takes a full commitment. You have to be all in, right? And that's what we want to do with our kids. We want to figure out, how are they communicating their needs to us? And then how can I communicate back? How can we as parents communicate back to our kids in a way that they are going to be receptive and hear what we are communicating? So I'm going to give you a couple examples. You can make your own dictionaries, okay? So this is an example of my dictionary for me to Asher. So, when I would go on a long walk in a park, and we still do this, but we would just go on these long meandering walks, and Asher would just talk to his heart's content about his area of interest. His interpretation is, my mom is interested in me and what I have to say. I often would, and I still do, bring Asher a little treat if I'm out and about working somewhere, and that he would interpret that as, my mom is always thinking of me and that she likes to do things for me. And then also taking a break from work to play a game, or just kind of dropping something to be present. Um, that's interpreted as, my mom will make time for me. She'll always make time for me. And then we went the other direction too. So I knew, back then, that if I could hear certain grumbles of frustration, that was my cue, like, oh, he's having a hard time. He's going to need me to intervene and help him kind of move away from whatever's going on. Sometimes he would ask me, oh, are we going out tonight? And I would say, no, I think we're in for the day. And this could be at like 3 in the afternoon. He'd be like, great. And he would run upstairs and put on his pajamas. Um, I always knew when he did that, he had had a rough day and he just really wanted to be comforted and kind of de-stress. And if he's asking me to spend a few minutes helping him set an intention for the next day, then I interpret that as well. He really is looking to be more intentional and make a positive change. So these are just a couple examples, but again, our kids are always communicating to us through everything that they do. So what we want to do is get to know our children's key phrases, right? Start really noticing. These could be verbal, nonverbal. How are they communicating their needs and their experience, their wants, their fears, all the emotions. We also want to know our own baggage so it doesn't interfere with our interpretations, right? Because we all have these blind spots. So stuff can get lost in translation, right? If the way that they are communicating to us is interpreted incorrectly because maybe we're triggered by something, maybe we have this idea that no one takes us seriously, right? And so if we've had a day where we felt not respected and taken seriously, maybe by a colleague, and then we show up to our parenting relationship with that, and our child says something, we could bring that interpretation to it and be like, oh, my child's not respecting me. That has nothing to do with it, right? So we want to understand what our own triggers are as well. And then just be really conscious of the way that we are communicating to our kids. So they are most open to hearing us. Again, this isn't all going to be verbal. In fact, maybe more than 50% of it isn't verbal. Okay, I'm going to check my time. I'm doing all right. Let's move on to tilt number 6, which is recognize how your energy affects your child. This is a lesson I learned when my son was about 6. Just a very brief version of this story, but I had been away for a weekend back in the days when we could travel, and I was at a retreat. It was a life coach retreat with Martha Beck. And it was just one of those weekends where, I came home feeling just really zen, and, I had done meditation, like I was feeling really grounded. And so I walked in the house, and we were like 3 months into like a months long regression at this point. So I walked into my house. My child was really happy to see me. And, but shortly after I got home, something triggered him and he got really upset. And I still had all this great energy going on. So I just got down on his level and I just folded him into my arms and I just breathed with him. And it was like I flipped a switch. It was the most incredible thing I've experienced. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, this is a superpower. If I can show up to parenting in this state, then maybe the meltdowns will be gone, right? So, we're often our first responders for our kids, and we do have this superpower in our energy. And so we want to think about how are we going to use that superpower for good or for evil. So let's talk about this concept. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this idea of mirror neurons, which Dr. Dan Siegel and Dr. Tina Payne Bryson write about in their book, The Whole Brain Child. But we know that through mirror neurons that we're mimicking each other's behavior, right? Our brains are firing these similar neurons depending on what's happening in the person that we're communicating with. So our kids are responding to this as well. And I would say that differently wired kids are more attuned to our energy, even. They're more sensitive and tuned into us, maybe, than neurotypical kids. I always say that a differently wired kid can read a room better than a seasoned politician. So they are really connected and tuned in. And so we really, really want to be conscious of our energy and be intentional about the way it's contributing to what's happening with our kids. And I would say, too, right now, more than ever, this is so true because we are all struggling, right? We're all kind of hitting that wall. And so you may notice that your energy is having even a stronger influence on what's happening with your kids. So, to proactively manage our energy, we want to again know what our emotional triggers are. So, we want to understand what are the things that tend to really get on our nerves, really annoy us, just so that we can kind of be aware of them and maybe proactively plan against them. This question here in the second point here, answer the big question, what am I making this mean? One of the best questions you can ask yourself anytime you're having an emotional reaction to anything involving your child, ask yourself, what am I making this mean? Right? Because we often can have a meaning that has nothing to do with reality. Again, it's rooted in our triggers, it's not rooted on what's actually going on with our kids. And then we want to design a reset ritual. So I think this is really important. This could be the transition from work to regular parenting life. Even if you're working from home, which most of us are, you can still design a little ritual to reset the energy. You can do a little ritual to change, to start the next day fresh. I'm actually going to show you an example. This is what I do in my Tilt Together Facebook group. Every Monday, we set a new intention for the week, right? New day, new week, new intention. And it's a way to put our stake in the ground and to kind of reset, push the reset button. And then on Fridays, we share a bright spot, which is a nice way to it's a ritual, right? It's a ritual that helps us kind of stay in a good positive energy. So, all right, I'm going to keep moving here. This is a big one, you guys. Tilt 7, practice relentless self-care. So important right now. And I will just say that when I talk about self-care, when I'm speaking to groups in person, I invariably see people in the audience who tear up right away, often because they're realizing they're not doing it. They are completely neglecting themselves. And that's a hard thing to just kind of sit with. A lot of people also have guilt associated with taking that time for themselves. They're just not prioritizing it. I also think that self-care is, it's kind of a cliche. It's lost some of its meaning, perhaps. But here's what I'm going to say about self-care. It is not optional. If you're a parent, if you're a human, it's not optional. If you're raising a differently wired child, you have to take time for yourself, especially now, again, in the midst of this pandemic and what's happening, in this time in our lives. Self-care is critical. So, something we want to do every single day. And there's an article, I don't know if you guys read it. It was called Our Surge Capacity is Depleted. It's why we feel so awful. And this is really one of the only ways that we can refill our surge capacity. So, again, non negotiable. I'm going to tell you how I define it because it doesn't have to be that big of a deal. I define self care as really any action that is two things. Number one, it's intentional. That just means that it's something you're consciously choosing to do because it is good for your mind, your body, and or your soul. Period. So it's not an afterthought. It's something you're saying, I'm going to do this for me. And that's part two. It's just for you, meaning that it has to be about you. That doesn't mean that you have to do it alone. Self-care, an intentional self-care action for you might be getting out for a hike one of these weekends. Your family might come along, no problem. You're still doing this, you're prioritizing the hike because you know that it's something you need to do for yourself. So intentional and just for you. And so these are some questions I'd love you guys to just kind of mull over. Just thinking about, like, how well am I meeting my physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual needs right now? And how might, if I'm not meeting those needs well, how could my lack of self-care practice actually be negatively affecting my ability to parent my child right now? And how might weaving more self-care into my life actually help my family, help me, help my child? Okay, so here are a couple strategies for prioritizing self-care. First of all, you want to create your ideal self-care practice. I would just brainstorm a list of things that would qualify for you as self-care. For me, just as an example, would be listening to a podcast while cooking. Cooking is real, man. Right now, with the whole family home every day, cooking and being responsible for people's food. But if I can listen to Pod Save America or like a Bachelor recap podcast, then it's kind of fun and it's self-care. Watching Queer Eye while folding laundry is another thing for me. Going for a brisk walk. I do Zoom co-working dates with my bestie in Amsterdam. So could be any number of things. It could be, taking a 10-minute shower with the door locked so no one can bother you. It could be just the littlest thing. And next, we want to defend against your self-care roadblocks. So if you know that there's that you're making a plan, but you're not following through, why, right? Find out what is getting in your way from successfully doing your self-care, and then try to come up with a plan for how to defend against that. And then lastly, build in a plan for support and accountability. This is really important. And if you're someone who is susceptible to peer pressure, this can be great because, make a plan with someone or join a team where you're going to have people rooting for you, like a online, group where you decide we're going to walk 3 miles a day for 30 days. And then you're on a team and now you've got accountability and you don't want to let people down. I actually do 2 days a week. I work out with my girlfriend in Los Angeles. We do a video workout together. So I share my screen and we catch up for a few minutes and then we work out. And I'm not going to miss that because it's also the time I get to catch up with her. So there's lots of ways to build in accountability. All right. Tilt 8. Let go of your impossible expectations for who you should be as a parent. So, in my experience, parents of atypical kids feel like they're failing or aren't doing enough more so than parents of neurotypical kids, partly because I think we get a lot of reminders from teachers and society and our Facebook news feeds and things where things aren't going well, right? And a lot of us tend to beat ourselves up about that. Again, now more than ever, I think we're being really hard on ourselves, especially if we see that our kids are not thriving with whatever their, remote or hybrid learning looks like. So I'm going to share a quote from Brene Brown. uh, Simple but true: I am enough. And I think it's really important to remember this, because when we're feeling like we're not enough, we're not patient enough, we're not resourceful enough, we're not good enough, we're not doing enough, all of those things, what we are really doing is demanding perfection from ourselves. And that's not real. That is not a message we want to send to our kids, many of whom already have perfectionistic tendencies. We do not want them to grow up feeling like they're not enough. So we really want to model our flaws, our failures, and our growth. So we want to give ourselves a break, essentially. Um, we want to unleash our inner critic. So just kind of think about, when are we most likely to judge and shame ourselves, and just get clear on that. Because again, this little inner voice, we know when it pops up. So we want to kind of know that it's there so it doesn't surprise us or have too much power over us. We want to treat ourselves with grace and kindness. Um, you know, Self compassion. I just actually had the opportunity to interview Kristen Neff for my podcast about self compassion, and it was so good. Her work is so important, but we really want to focus on being kind and compassionate with ourselves right now, um, especially after our less than brilliant parenting moments, which I'm sure you don't have many. I have quite a few, so I'm really good. I get lots of opportunities to practice this, but we want to be thinking about, how can we, in those really hard moments or afterwards, how can we kind of recover for ourselves and treat ourselves with this grace and kindness. And I will just say that Michelle Borba, it talks about lowering the bar. So I'm all for that right now, right? I think we should all be lowering the bar, not just for our kids, but for ourselves as well. All right, tilt number 9: help your children embrace self discovery. I really think this is one of the best gifts we can give our differently wired children, is this knowledge of who they are, how their brain works, and what they need to do to create the life that they want. Because when we can really focus on self discovery, they are going to grow up really knowing themselves. They are going to be able to develop those self advocacy skills, which are so critical. And, our goal is that they grow up to be self actualized adults. And so we want them to feel invested in themselves. We want them to be their own greatest champions, and to really understand, you know, their strengths, of which they have so many, their strengths and their gifts, and know how to tap into those. And yeah, of course, we want them to understand areas of lagging skills so that they can feel excited and invested in developing those as well. So we can do this by communicating in ways that encourage growth. And that really means validating their emotions and empathizing with what they're experiencing. Just kind of every conversation that we have with them about, especially areas where they might be beating themselves up, or their inner critic, their negative self talk is really taking over. We want to validate their experience. We want to empathize. We want to give them space to feel that. We want to hold the space for them, but kind of respect and honor their experience. We don't want to push them um, until they're really ready. And of course, we want to avoid bringing up challenges in difficult moments, because there's no learning that's going to happen in the middle of a storm. So we want to wait till that blows over, and then more calmly explore what actually happened. And I just want to say, like, be aware of if your kids are kids who tend to apologize a lot. A lot of our kids will say, I'm sorry, about things, because over years of being getting in trouble in school, or being punished, or for kind of being just who they are, they they may kind of turn that into this idea that there is something inherently wrong with them. So we want to be aware of that, because that's something we want to really work hard to change, that inner dialogue that they have. So everything is an opportunity for growth. And this is the great news. This is the most wonderful news, right? Everything that happens, every challenge, every frustrating situation, every failure, all of it, it is an opportunity to get curious, to learn, and to grow. Like that is how we live, right? This is what life is all about. And so we want to, with our kids, we want to notice, we want to reflect, we want to ask questions and help our kids make their own meaningful connections so that they can discover this. I'm going to give you a couple examples. Uh, Here's what it might sound like. I noticed you turned your computer off without any yelling today. How did you do that? What do you think was different today compared with what happened yesterday? Here's another example. Have you noticed that getting out the door for school at the end of the week is much harder than at the beginning of the week? Any ideas about what that might be about? Here's one last example. It seems like when you're listening to soft classical music, you're better able to focus on your homework. Have you noticed that connection? So you see, we're kind of pointing things out, we're getting curious, and we're asking them to make that connection and explore it. And we can do this even from when our kids are a very young age. We just want to always be looking for opportunities to help our kids make connections between their thoughts, their feelings, and their actions. All right, I'm checking my clock. We've got one more tilt and I'm running low on time. Okay, I'm going to end with this. Create a world where your child can feel secure. So, even in a pre-COVID world, many differently wired kids feel insecure and safe in some and unsafe in some aspect of their daily lives, especially in school for a lot of kids. Many are now feeling insecure at home because of what's happening in the world. So I will just say that helping our kids feel secure in their world, in their environment is really important. And I think it's what our kids need right now more than anything else. We know that when our kids don't feel safe and secure, they are not able to, everything gets stunted, right? There's no learning that's going to happen. There's no social emotional development. They are more prone to withdrawal, anxiety, and depression. But when they feel safe, emotionally safe, and Tina Payne Bryson talks about this, feeling safe, seen and soothed and secure, that's when they are going to be available for the growth and the learning that we want them to experience, and they can experience during this time as well. So to do this, we want to be careful that we're not projecting our own fears and insecurities on our kids right now. It's hard to do because a lot of us we're having conversations at the dinner table or just with our partners if we're living with someone, talking about what's going on. But just be aware of how we are talking about certain things around our kids. We want to, again, be sure that we're not using shame inducing language in the way we talk to our kids about things they might have done wrong or screw ups or bad choices or skills they're developing. If there are demands we can take off their plate right now, this is a great time to lighten their load. We want to do what we can to make home feel really safe. I always skip coping strategies, helping our kids kind of have some coping strategies for in the moment when they're anxiety, if they have that, if they're feeling insecure. Creating a cozy or comfortable or safe space at home. And we spend a lot of time at home these days. So hopefully this is something you've been doing. And then again, we want to validate, empathize, and reinforce with love every single day. And I will tell you, this can be as simple as making sure that your eyes light up when you see your child first thing in the morning. We want them to feel loved. They want them to look at us and know that we've got them and that we appreciate who they are. And so we can say that to them. We can do it through rituals, hugs, words, baking. I'm doing a lot of baking these days. So however we can do that, we want to reinforce so they can really feel soothed and seen right now. All right. That is my presentation. I am going to turn it over for some questions and see if I can figure out how to stop sharing with all of these.
I I'll jump in and I apologize for barking Bailey in the background, but there's nothing I can do about it right now. So first of all, Debbie, I know I speak on behalf of everyone who's listening that, when your voice comes out with such wisdom and empathy and calm, it just sounds all so wonderful and reasonable. And as parents, it's so hard to tap into sometimes. So I'm going to start with, there's many questions. We have a stop at 12:10, so I'm going to put a couple together. The first group of questions is around, how do you lean in or surrender when you're really being treated poorly as a parent? It goes back to your reframing, but sometimes it's really challenging. So any recommendations on that?
Yes, and it is so hard just to acknowledge I've been there, and it can feel like, especially I don't know what your demographics are, but as moms, often we're like the receptacle for all of it, right? So I think it's really important to make sure that you are taking care of yourself. I've talked with a lot of people about this, and that idea that the more mindfulness that we can practice and just taking moments for ourselves so that we can keep filling up our own emotional bank, our reserve tank, all of those things, that is so critical. We know that in the moment, if we're, kind of on the receiving end of some tough behavior, if we react with our emotions and the hurt that we're feeling or the frustration, all of those things, we might as well just be pouring gasoline on a fire. It is so hard to step away in those moments and not do that. But it really takes, first of all, have a plan for how you're going to handle those moments. So if you kind of know, especially if there are situations where things tend to happen, try to proactively plan, okay, if this happens, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to go to the bathroom, close the door, take 5 deep breaths. Maybe I'll call my sister. Like, think about what are the things you can do to help you get through that moment, and plan it in advance. You've got like your emergency kit. Um, Try to be as present as you can in the moment. Um, I promise you that in difficult moments, if the calmer you can stay, the more quickly that difficult moment is going to pass by. When it's over, that's when you leave and you do what you need to refill yourself. Maybe you need to, go close the door and scream and hit the pillow, like whatever you need to do to kind of process all of that. But we want to work on that on our own, not take it personally what's going on with our kids, because we know it's not personal. It is their inability to do anything different in that moment. So we just have to keep tending to ourselves and filling up the reserve tank as much as possible.
It's a good segue to encourage people to join in later for Laura Kastner and Getting to Calm, which will be a
Yes.
wonderful talk later this evening. What are some recommendations you have for helping neurodiverse learners deal with online school? Everyone is facing this. Sometimes it just seems like an inappropriate amount of work for my kids. And how do you be the bridge between that?
Yeah, that is so hard right now. And it's certainly something I'm hearing a lot of, and I'm experiencing it myself. So I would say that as parents, we really need to advocate for what it does and doesn't work for our kids. So I know a lot of younger kids, Zoom school is not a possibility. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It is, a child who is already struggling in school, and now we're asking them to do really mission impossible of something that is completely counter to the way that they're wired. So as a parent, in this time, this is the time to ask specifically for what you need and want. So if you can actually talk to the school and push back and say, we will be doing this, this, and this, or this is the way this will work. If your kids have IEPs, you can ask for another meeting right now, and say, these accommodations that we had are no longer relevant, and this is what we need now. We should be asking for what we need, because I do not think it's worth it to push these kids to do something that is going to kill their love of learning. They're already feeling no motivation, they're feeling crushed, and we have to prioritize their social and emotional health right now. So I don't know if that's the popular answer, but I'm really all about taking care of our kids right now. The learning when they feel good, they're going to be able to learn so much more quickly. But to force something that could do long-term harm for them, that's a hard pass for me. So ask for what you need.
This is a tough follow-up question, and clearly we have a wide range of age kid,
Mhm.
parents on the Zoom. Do you have any recommendations or resources for self-harm behavior,
Mm.
specifically for children who don't yet have the verbal speech development to discuss their emotions and what's coming up for them? I have conflicting advice from psychologists and OTs. One says comfort, listen, others say ignore, which I'm
Don't ignore.
don't ignore.
No, absolutely not. I mean, obviously getting help, and getting the right kind of help is really important. Like a therapist who's in alignment with your family values. I would say a therapist or someone who suggests that you ignore that behavior, that doesn't feel good to me at all. Especially if this is a younger child, they are communicating they in the way that they know how. And it's our job to be those interpreters, to get curious and to try to support them. And it sounds incredibly exhausting to be the parent of this child. And my heart goes out to you, because I can just imagine how worrying and hard and challenging that is. But keep going in and get creative, and just keep looking for help until you find someone that you get kind of that hit in your body, like, okay, this is our person.
Great. I think one of the things that's so empowering about your talk is parents do not to put too much pressure on parents, but you are the person who really has the superpowers to tap
Mhm.
into your own child and lean
Mhm.
in on what those needs are. Not that you have the answers, but so that's really great. A bunch of questions on socializing and how to make friends online and deal with social distancing and play dates. I see this with my own little 2-year-old grandson who's not in preschool, and he gets into a park with other kids, and he's, like excited by these aliens, but doesn't quite know what to do. So, any advice on that you've seen helpful for families?
Yeah, I think there are so many groups popping up now. Social skills groups for a number of ages that are popping up all over the place, and a lot of occupational therapy places. Rosemary White's office is fantastic in the Seattle area. I hope that she's doing these right now, but a lot of them are offering virtual groups, and there's actually a lot that can happen in terms of social emotional development, and actually in kind of a safe, emotionally safe way to play with some of these things if it's facilitated by someone who's really thoughtful and knowledgeable about these kids. So, um, yeah, I would say to try to find online opportunities right now. It is really hard. I mean, this is it's really tough for these kids, especially because they're already, many of them just have lagging social skills, and
Yeah.
just to have all of it stop feels difficult. I know that, but there are opportunities, and I think that a lot of good learning can happen virtually with the right group.
Yeah, I will really encourage our listeners to check out all the resources on the Every Child Summit platform that they're accessing, because there are a tremendous, wisdom and resources. So I'll make this the last question. Can you share any tools to help a 9-year-old with ADHD executive functioning issues work more easily and independently with distance learning?
If I could, I would write the book. And no, here's what I would say. I mean, again, for a child, a 9-year-old, which is a really amazing and challenging age, because the expectations and demands at school are starting to level up. If for a child with ADHD with lagging executive functioning skills, they're going to be still down here. That is a huge disconnect. And then let's throw in virtual learning. And by the way, you've got to pay attention to all these things. Um, I really think it's asking so much. I would look for what your goals are as a family. Like, what is important for you that your child is gains over the next, however many months that we're in this situation, and focus on one or two smaller goals and try to work on those. Maybe it is, you know, emotional regulation when things don't go their way. Maybe it is becoming more conscious of the time and like learning how to use a timer on there. Or like pick something small and work on one skill, because we're asking them to do way too many things that they're just simply not capable of doing right now.
Fantastic. So Debbie, I've so appreciated the conversation. I always feel a little guilty now as a grandmother that I didn't have access to the likes of the wisdom and genius that you and others that are on the schedule today are providing for parents. So thank you so much. And a bunch of people are asking, I think we're sending out your slides. So
Yes.
people were asking for the last slide that had your contact information. And I'm just assuring everyone that's joined us that you will get that information. And thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you.